I can't start this session without first acknowledging that we live in a world which is ravaged by climate crisis, the crisis that has been caused by and large by the greedy human actions. And while the climate change has been changing everywhere, we're seeing it's becoming now part of our daily news feed to hear these communities being impacted by flood that other community or country is dealing with the drought, the heat waves on the heat record. The world is in a crisis, and that crisis, in so many ways, is centered around inequality. As I said, while the climate change is changing everywhere, how your position within the sphere of power and influence have a lot to do on how you will be impacted, how you will be able to adapt to the climate change. And it's because of that, as us as Women and Gender Constituency, we do engage to make sure that we really address the global community, that being the patriarchy, the capitalism, the neocolonialism, all of it have in so many ways positioned, for example, communities, indigenous people, women, girls, local community, people living in rural areas, people living in urban poor area, even the ones who are carrying the brunt of the climate crisis, even though they have contributed the least to the crisis. So today, we take time to invite you to share what is at stake for this COP29 when it comes to gender, and why gender matters, and why is it important for you to understand our framing of the gender issue, and also for you to understand what we are asking for in this COP29. I want also to start with a disclaimer that as a feminist, we engage in the UNFCCC very aware and mindful that this is not a feminist space, but this is the space that we have to advance global decision when it comes to climate change, and hence all of us to be able to make progress when it comes to climate action. So to unpack what is at stake during this COP29. Today, I'm being accompanied by my colleague who have worked in this agenda item for the longest time and have a knowledge that they would share, but also will open a space to hear from all of you, to ask questions, to co-create what we can do together to make sure that we really come out of COP29 with an ambitious decisions on gender. So for today, our agenda, to help us guide this conversation, our agenda will take you back to the overview. How it started within the UNFCCC, and why is it important? And we'll share the journey to integrate gender as one part of it. My colleague, dear, what is happening, what has happened this during SP, and what is happening, what do we know that is happening? And then I will come back to also share with you the demands for the women from the Women and Gender Constituency. And then we'll have Esther, we open up.
I think we lost Mishi there.
Yes.
Bye.
Okay.
Okay.
Colleagues, apologies. We did lose our colleague Mishi. We are texting her just to ensure that she can move to a more stable connection. But as Mishi was saying, she was going through the agenda. But maybe Claudia, you can jump in and then we can proceed. Thank you so much, Claudia.
Yeah,
Am I
perfect.
audible now?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, now you're back.
Oh, I don't know where I got lost. And Claudia,
You are at our demand. Yeah.
To be kind to both of us. And then we have time to for all of you to ask questions and engage in a conversation. And also we'll share with you what we can do together to make sure that we really advance these demands. So to start with, without further ado, allow me to welcome my colleague Claudia to share the overview of how it started and the history around gender in the UNFCCC. Claudia?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mishi. Okay, so first of all, thank you all so much for being here. It's such a pleasure to have this session alongside all of the panelists and with so much gratitude as well for Sukiswa, the coordinator, and the interpreters. So first, we wanted to to jump into a little bit, have a more overarching view. So what is gender? Why is gender relevant? Why is gender relevant in the UNFCCC? And what history do we see within there? So first, we wanted to start by discussing, we know that gender is usually conflated with woman, but having there's a difference between that and just applying a gender lens. So we first wanted to discuss the importance of understanding gender as a lens, as a social construct, something that intersects with other social relations, such as age, race, disability, and many others. So that means that although when we say gender, we do not mean woman alone. And of course, part of the reason that sometimes that these policies enable and empower women is because climate change impacts have that gender differentiation, and it's usually in harm or hazardous for women for women and girls in particular, and other gender diverse people. So that's an important overview to give as we consider gender within the UNFCCC and as we consider the context that we're going to jump into. That said, it's also important to understand that this concept has nuance, to introduce understanding and to start with people where they're from. So understanding that the concept of gender isn't something that is universally accepted as this general definition, but it's something that we have to really clarify to be able to fortify our advocacy. So next slide, please, Suki. So one of the things that we really see that one of the things that really come into play in our advocacy is the question of what data do we have that really demonstrates that there's gender differentiation, what really proves that specific genders are impacted in different ways. And now we feel that with time that question has really been solidified, and we no longer have to ask that question as we did before, because now we have so many different studies, so many different toolkits, so many different reports that really demonstrate that those gender impacts, including the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, in the 6th assessment report, which basically has so many references to gender throughout, but one specific one is that it's we're saying with high confidence, gender and other social inequities compound vulnerability to climate change impacts. Addressing inequities and access to resource, assets and services, as well as participation in decision-making and leadership is essential to achieving gender and climate justice. So we have this massive scientific report that basically is the foundation for a lot of the climate change science that we have, that is also recognizing the impacts of gender, and is also recognizing and is establishing this clear this is what's happening and this is how it's happening. So we just wanted to give that context before jumping into the history. Next slide, Suki, please. So when we began in the UNFCCC, there was a real struggle to even have gender recognized. Of the sister Rio conventions, UNFCCC was the only one that had no mention of gender or women rights. So there was nothing to work here, basically. Then we had, prior to 2001, there were no decisions that included any language on gender. And it wasn't until 2010 on COP16 that we started seeing some substantive decisions that had that mention of gender equality. We also had the recognition of, there was a lot of the sense of also gender balance. This was something that came afterwards, but we could see throughout history that women and other genders weren't participating the same within the UNFCCC. So within this context, a lot of the advocacy came up, a lot of the let's say the foundations of the Women and Gender Constituency came up from this idea that we really needed to integrate gender within the UNFCCC. Next slide, please. So where are we now? And this is like a very like overarching overview of everything. We have a well-established network, Women and Gender Constituency. We have more than 120 decisions that already recognize gender and women issues. We have gender equality as one of the principles of the Paris Agreement. We have a gender action plan that has been renewed and that is poised for renewal this year. We have gender plans under all climate finance mechanisms. And like saying this, and this is like the very clear, like the positive, we also have challenges to remain. For example, since 2008, since the UNFCCC started, there hasn't been a COP where we have more than 36% participation of women or of other genders. So for example, at COP27, at COP28, there was 34% participation. At COP27, there was 35% participation. So really, we're not seeing like a lot of progress in gender balance and some of like these key areas that we've really tried like make strides towards achieving. Next slide, please. Michelle, I see your hand, and we're gonna have a section for Q&A at the end. So, but please feel free to like put your question in the chat in the meantime. Thanks. This is a very brief overview of timeline of gender, of like where we see gender, how it's grown within the UNFCCC, and I'll pass it by quickly. First, we had the first standalone decision on gender at COP7 in 2001. This decision was specifically regarding gender balance, but it did not specify like specific metrics. It did not say like how we work to achieve that gender balance, and it did not establish like clearly like what we were working for. Then in COP18, we have the adoption of a 2-year gender action plan. This 2-year gender action plan was basically like the first chance that we had. Oh no, sorry, this is almost taking the slide. Basically at COP18, 11 years later, we had the second decision on gender balance. And this second decision on gender balance was more powerful because it basically said that we had to work towards something. And it also established gender as it's established gender as this more like priority for the agenda. Then in 2014, we had the adoption of a 2-year work program on gender. Then in COP22, we had the gender and climate change decision, which which extended the Lima work program. Then we had the adoption of the 2-year gender action plan. Then both the gender action plan and the Lima work program collapsed. And these were like milestones for gender. So this was basically the first times that we were seeing that real integration of why is gender a priority? How are we going to implement it? And there were still challenges around both of those, but there was a sense that we were finally like getting on track regarding gender. Then we have in COP25.
Sorry, there's a request to slow down.
Okay,
Sorry.
perfect. Thank you.
Also,
So then
I think you froze a bit, Clau. If you can just take a second back.
Okay, perfect. We'll do. Okay, so then we have like after we had those 3 years of work program with both the Lima work program and the gender action plan, then both were renewed for the enhanced Lima work program. So in COP25. And here we see the Lima work program that we now know and love. Then in COP27, we had, which is like this is the latest point that we're gonna get in this timeline, we had the intermediate review of the gap. And now in COP29, we are poised for the renewal of the gap, the review and the renewal of the gap, which is one of the reasons why we'll get later into of why this year is so important for gender. So that's like an overview of the history of gender. And now I'll pass on to my colleague, Rebecca, for the continuation and I'll dig deeper into the gender action plan itself.
Yes, thank you so much, Claudia. My name is Rebecca Heuvelmans. I work for Women Engage for Common Future, and I'll look a little bit into what the Gender Action Plan is, and also give you an overview of what the Women and Gender Constituency has assessed has worked really well since the adoption of the Enhanced Lima Work Program on Gender in those 5 years, but also what hasn't worked so well. And that will all lead us to a point where we'll discuss what we would love to see in a new Gender Action Plan. So please go to the next slides. Super. So the Gender Action Plan sets out objectives and activities under 5 priority areas. They have a couple of aims. So their aim is to advance knowledge and understanding of gender-responsive climate action and its coherent mainstreaming in the implementation of the UNFCCC and the work of parties, the Secretariat, UN entities, but also other stakeholders at all levels. And furthermore, the goal is to advance women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in the UNFCCC process. And they have set out a couple of priority areas, 5 of them. So I'll go for them quite quickly, and you can, of course, always find these on the UNFCCC websites. First being, which is called Priority Area A, capacity building, knowledge management, and communication. Second, gender balance, participation, and women's leadership. And I'll ask you to go to the next slide. Coherence, gender responsive implementation and means of implementation, and monitoring and reporting. And I would love to go a little bit into the reflections that were compiled in the this lovely submission written by the Women and Gender Constituency to the Gender Action Plan. So there were a few. Kindly go to the next slide. So what has been a success story in these 5 years of implementation of the Enhanced Lima Work Program on Gender? That's what this beautiful abbreviation stands for. And if at any point you see an abbreviation that you don't understand, feel free to put that in the chat always, because it can be a bit confusing. So what has proven to be effective? So we have seen quite the acceleration of the appointments of national gender and climate change focal points. So when the first Gender Action Plan was adopted, there were 38 of them. And now at the end of February 2024, there's been an increase to 140 national gender and climate change focal points in 110 countries. And whilst there are challenges in the definition of the role and the mandate and the financing, the capacity that these national gender and climate change focal points have, they are formidable assets towards gender transformative climate action. And so an increase in their appointment is definitely great news that can be thanks to the GAP. Secondly, there's been a lot of progress in tracking participation of women in the UNFCCC policy processes, which is a cornerstone of the Gender Action Plan. Unfortunately, there are a lack of specific targets when it comes to the participation of women, but the tracking of it has definitely increased, also thanks to great work from, for example, organizations like We Do that are, of course, in this call as well, but also the work of the Secretariat, for example, with the gender composition assessments that they write each year. And particularly in 2021 and 2022, they gathered additional data, for example, on speaking time. So, right, maybe women are equally presented, but are they also taking the floor as much as men are, for example? And thirdly, there has been an increase in the amount of national gender action plans that are inspired by the Gender Action Plan in general. So despite that not being an explicit mandate or anticipated, several countries have adopted this. So countries, for example, like Nigeria, Zambia, Colombia, Mexico have formulated a national plan. And this is really quite important because it fosters context-specific gender-responsive climate actions. And we've also seen that in countries, for example, like Colombia, it has catalyzed political will to work on this subject increasingly. And tied to this, a majority of the national gender and climate change action plans have included specific actions to support grassroots women and their organizations, which is a cascading effect, again, of having this gender action plan. All positive news, but of course, there are some limitations and gaps in the GAP that the Women and Gender Constituency has also noticed, also when conducting, talking with other stakeholders in this process. So in the next slides, what has not worked so well? So something that we've noticed is that there is a siloing of gender still. So gender issues have been confined to the Gender Action Plan, and it leads to a limiting understanding of how broader gender dimensions should be included and are included in different negotiation tracks. And so there's an insufficient integration of gender within these different tracks. And we also notice that the expertise that, for example, a national gender and climate change focal point has is oftentimes confined to just the gender negotiations, even though we need them everywhere. Secondly, that comes with the challenges that the National Gender and Climate Change Focal Points has. So these can span from capacity to financial constraints to uncertainty surrounding their perceived role in the delegation, and also the lack of appointments of them still. And thirdly, event-based coherence activities. Because while coherence was prominently emphasized within the Gender Action Plan, the implementation has primarily manifested through workshops and events. And so there's a bit of a gap between the vision of coherence and then its substantive realization. And lastly, and quite importantly for us as Women and Gender Constituency, is a lack of intersectionality. So in the Enhanced Lima Work Program on Gender and the Gender Action Plan, there is no explicit reference to the impacts, needs, or experiences in relation to climate change based on people's intersecting identities. And so parties to the convention are not necessarily compelled to report activities on this important intersection, nor does the Secretariat have a specific mandate to collect information or organize events related to this topic. There are a couple of other small concerns, for example, that a lot of the responsibility on the implementation lies with the Secretariats. We're still not noticing enough of the tangible impacts on the country level. And of course, what I mentioned earlier already, the role of the National Gender and Climate Change Focal Points, who are faced with serious financial constraints. And in general, the lack of financing for the implementation of these plans remains a very, very big challenge. And so before we get into, of course, we are taking these points of the review into hopefully advocating for a stronger, more inclusive gender action plan. And I know that we will be discussing that later in the session. But for now, I'm very happy to ask my colleague Diego to have a look at what's happened during the session in Bonn. And give us a bit of a reflection of what we noticed during the negotiations there and the sessions. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rebecca and Claudia and Mishi, the interpreters, and everyone who made this event possible. And thank you very much for the space for me to share a little bit of our collective experience that we had when attending the subsidiary body meetings this past June in Bonn, Germany. Just as a quick recap, I know most of you are familiar, but the subsidiary body meetings happen twice a year. The first segment takes place in June, the first half of June, in the offices of the UNFCCC Secretariat in Bonn, Germany. This is the subsidiary body on implementation and the subsidiary body in technical and scientific advice, SUBSTA and SBI, respectively. And the purpose of this is to work on the more technical issues, meaning trying to get a decision as most advanced as possible. And then in the second segment of the subsidiary body meetings, which happens on the first week of COP, you finalize that document, and then hopefully it passes to the parties, to either the Conference of the Parties or the Conference of the Parties meeting for the Paris Agreement, in order for its final adoption, and usually accompanied with a heavy political discussion where all of the finer details and positions are negotiated in order for parties to be able to reach a final decision by consensus. So just to kind of give you a little bit of context of where we're at, and of course the nature of the negotiation, which, as I mentioned, was a much more technical discussion. So we can go the next slide. So just this is a general overview, and we'll deeper on each one of these points. But I would like to start by providing a little bit of context of the structure of the negotiation for this year. So during the first 3 days of the negotiation, we we were convened by the Secretariat to have a workshop. This was a workshop that was mandated by the parties, and its objective was to look at the report that had just been published a couple of days before the session, which compiled all of the information that was provided by parties through a submission process. So for those who are not familiar, the submission process is that in which parties, and in most occasions also observer organizations or other relevant stakeholders, are able to provide written inputs on a specific question. In this case, the Secretariat was again mandated by the parties, had to collect the views and opinions of the of all relevant stakeholders, including member states, on what was the progress that they had achieved so far in regards of both the Lima work program as well as the Gender Action Plan. So I'm sure many of you did. There was a lot of information provided to the Secretariat, and then the Secretariat compile all that into a report that you can access publicly on the UNFCCC website, and that gave kind of a view of what had countries advanced, what were some of the challenges, but specifically what were some of the gaps that throughout this work that they had identified that needed to be addressed within the review of the Lima Work Program and the Gender Action Plan. So fast forward back to the workshop. The idea of this workshop was to kind of go over the report and look at the different inputs and the different opinions that were provided by the parties and all relevant stakeholders, and kind of dig a little bit deeper. There was a lot of exercises regarding prioritization, trying to help kind of parties to identify, what among the very broad spectrum of actions and gaps that were identified, which ones were which ones repeated most, which ones parties or stakeholders were more interested in working on, et cetera, et cetera. The general consensus of the workshop was that it was useful at the beginning in order to help kind of, again, be more visual and try to identify where were those kind of convergent points. But by the end of the workshop, which again, it lasted for 3 days, there was a sense of tiredness from a lot of the participants, because some elements of the workshop were considered by most as not very productive, or that they were just taking time out from the negotiations. So by the end of the workshop, there was kind of a mixed opinions on whether this event had been as useful as it could have been, or or there were some parts of it that could have been reduced or completely taken out, and again provide a little bit more time for negotiations. The second part of the ESB meetings in regards to gender had to do with the actual negotiations, which again was predominantly parties, and having observers sit on the second row, and having them kind of express their first their visions and their priorities. Ideally or initially thought for both the Lima Work Program as well as the Gender Action Plan, and then start pushing towards a consensus. The room was I'll come back to this slide, but if we can go to the next slide. So the objective of the negotiation, as both Claudia and Rebecca mentioned, was to review both the Lima Work Program, which is that's a more kind of general document that was adopted 10 years ago in the COP20 in Lima. Sorry, 15 years ago. Wow, and yes, 10 years ago, sorry. It was adopted 10 years ago in the COP20 of Lima. And the objective of that was kind of to provide a general framework. And then subsequently, the Gender Action Plan was that document in which specific activities, indicators were added in order to fulfill the general priority areas that were established in the Lima Work Program. So within this revision process, which is the first one that happens for the Lima Work Program, it's 10 years, and then the Gender Action Plan is 5 years, right? So then you had the first revision of the Lima Work Program, and then the second revision of the Gender Action Plan. So based on that, the idea was again to revise both documents, but the reality is that there were only 3 negotiation sessions, and because of that, the time and capacity of negotiators was limited, and therefore the discussion ended up just focusing on the Lima Work Program. The Gender Action Plan has not even been open yet, so that poses, of course, an important challenge, because this kind of limits the capacity of parties to moving forward to the Gender Action Plan. And as we will see in a moment, there's so many items still open within the Lima Work Program that it's not looking like the at COP29 parties will be able to adopt both an enhanced Lima Work Program and a new Gender Action Plan, but rather have ideally, and we'll talk more about that, but have the Lima Work Program and then move forward to the Gender Action Plan in subsequent sessions. Providing a little bit more details on what was the temperature in the room. The room was very divided. There's basically 2 main camps, or you could call it two big visions that looks to and within those own visions there are a lot of nuance, right? So it's not just 2 different camps, but within those camps there are many divisions, that there's also a lot of bridging area that happens in between both of them. So the 2 largest positions could be summarized within those that are looking to enhance and to strengthen the Lima Work Program. They're looking to really address the gaps that have been identified by parties and try to build a much more robust, much intersectional, much more diverse Gender Action Plan. And those that do not really agree or do not share the values of gender equality, and do not, for national reasons, it's just not a priority area for them. So for them, the less comprehensive or the most procedural option would be the best. That would be kind of the 2 large positions. But again, within those 2 very large positions, there's a lot of bridging that's happening, particularly at the sub-regional level, right? So, and being respectful of Chatham House rules, I'm not going to provide any specific vision from any country, but just to provide kind of a general assessment of the more broader regional groups, because you have the Western Bloc, which is again within this more enhancing the Lima Work Program, and then you have a more conservative vision, but it's basically led by the Eastern Europe Bloc and the MENA region. But again, within those groups, there's you could say that Africa and Latin America are really pushing for a much more ambitious Gender Action Plan, trying to gap between those 2 visions, but as long as the necessary resources and means of implementation are put in place in order to ensure that the actions and the broader objectives of the Lima Work Program that countries are able to fulfill them This, of course, includes the necessary capacity, the necessary financial resources, the technology that allows parties to engage and to fulfill or to achieve the objectives that have been established by the Lima Work Program. There are, as the slide mentions, there is a lot of mistrust. There is one particular issue that was brought by one party in the Western countries bloc that wants to move or duplicate currently the Lima Work Program serves the conference of the party, meaning that it covers all of the COP, and it does not necessarily, it's not an issue that is either negotiated or followed by the CMA, the Conference of the Parties meeting, or the Paris Agreement. And the idea of this party is that they want to duplicate this item into the CMA so that the gender discussions happen both under the COP as well as under the CMA. There is a lot of question, a lot of doubt on what would be the objective or the benefit of doing this beyond stretching efforts and having potentially two different mandates to the different governing bodies. So again, the parties were very reluctant to just adopt this without a broader discussion, which unfortunately, because of the time constraints, was very hard to have. This together with changing positions, also the Secretariat trying to bridge, there were some breaches of trust to some of the parties. So in general, by the second and third negotiation session, there was, again, a lot of mistrust and animosity for this to continue moving forward because of the very divergent points of view. The next slide. So just and starting to wrap up, what happened at the end was that we had a procedural decision, which basically requested parties to continue the discussion during the next SB sessions and then move it forward to COP. But then the saving grace, to put it some way, was that we ended up with an annex to that procedural decision that has it's based on the original text of the Lima Work Program, but it adds a lot of the points or the majority of the points that were brought by parties as a result of the workshop, together with basically the first round of discussion. This has the inputs of both all of the groups, and then they are color coded. So you have a yellow text, which is what the co-facilitators have added, but that it has not been properly discussed. And then there is the green text, which is again the text that has been added by the co-facilitators, but that has been agreed by most of the parties. Everything is in brackets. The fact that it's in green does not mean that it has been adopted. It just means that there is a general consensus, and therefore the subsequent discussion should be much more focused on the yellow text than on the green text. These are, again, most of this addition, this added text comes from informal discussions where observers were not allowed to participate. So what we as observers were able to engage was only in those 3 negotiation sessions where countries came together and kind of discuss what had happened in the informal discussions, and then how to try to move forward. This text is by no means open. There's a lot of contingents in a lot of the topics, and it was actually thanks to the Latin American bloc that they were able to save this and move it forward, and it's a good starting point. But that's basically where we stand in regards of the gender negotiations. And again, very happy. Sorry, it took a little bit too long. It's, as you can see, very passionate about this, but I hope it was a good summary and overview, and looking forward to any question.
Thank you so much, Claudia, Rebecca, and Diego, for getting us through the history of what has happened, how decisions have started to be introduced, the 11-year gap between the first mention of gender to the mention of gender, the progress between 3-year work, 2 years work program to 3-year work program to gender action plan, now to the 5-year work program that is lapsing, to what happened in SB 60 and the text that we have been seeing as it's been shared there. So that is pretty much the journey to where we started to where we are now. And as has been said, like a lot has happened and it continued to happen. There was one slide that Diego did mention that we'll come back to it and was not able to, but between the beginning of this year to now, because of the urgency of the gender, we did, the Women and Gender Constituency did send two letters to the presidency. So the first letter was early in the beginning of the year, and this was in reflection of the composition of the organizing team of the COP presidency with a lack of gender parity within the team. And we also took that opportunity to raise concerns on the need to really have the team that reflected ambition in the mandate that the COP29 has been given in making sure that we have a robust gender work program and gender action plan. But also a few weeks ago, we also sent another letter, and this letter was in response. Again, this is for us to put on record that we are concerned with the lack of political leadership, and we do know that if we need to have a robust and ambitious gender work program and its action plans, we need to have a very strong political leadership from the presidents, but also from the highest level of party delegation, including heads of the states and ministers and head of delegation. So those are the two work that we have done. And I think it's fair to say that we're starting to see like movement of gender work program being mentioned a little bit more as compared that it has been in a few months. But yet there is a lot at stake. And that is why we have this webinar as well, to really ask you to be part of the campaign as well, and to be able to engage your parties in the presidency and everyone who can support to make sure that we have a robust gender work program and gender action. So I'll take you to the demands now. If you can move to the next slide. And I think it's important, especially for those who are not following gender, to understand we use this, for us who work in this space, we use them interchangeably, but there are two important, or there are two sets of decision, right? So we have what we call gender work program. And this is what is being referenced as Lima work program. So this will be a top line text which will shape what the work program is. It's sort of like establishing the actual work program. And then parties were supposed to develop the gender action plan of the work program. So these are the two decisions, and potentially you will hear often they are mentioned together, but we do have precedency in 2016 when we have the work program, 3-year work program agreed in 2016, and then 2017, we had agreed 2 years gender action plan. In 2019, we have both of them together. We have decision, which was gender work program, and its a gender action plan, both agreed together. That is now becoming the ideal, to have both of them agreed together. But as Diego said, there is dynamics. So as of now, because the conversation, the action plan, for example, has not even started, what it has been presented is the conversation and the text on the work program. And the work program is as I said, is a broader text, and the action plan is where the details are. So what Rebecca presented, the previous one, it has 5 priority areas, it has specific activities. So the conversation around those has not even started, and we are not sure if we'll be able in this COP to finalize the work program and to start conversation and discussion on the agenda action plan. We are more likely to have the work program agreed and then the action plan to be developed later. But we also do hear there are some parties who feel that we can do all of those. We can have both decisions during this COP. So what are the demands from the WGC? So from the WGC, if you can go to the next slide. So for WGC, we have what we call strategic demands, and we also, as the team, as the working group, we have worked on what we call text-specific proposals as well, because as Diego said, we do have text since born, so we have worked on that text-specific proposal as well, and we are happy to share that with you and anyone who wants to engage. To if you have relationship with parties and you want some specific text recommendation, kindly let us know. We'll be able to guide you and support you in that regard. But in terms of the strategic demands, we are asking, the first demands is the 10-year timeframe. As Claudia has said, the first work program was 2 years, and then we went to 3 years, and then we went to 5 years, the one that we are lapsing. Based on the assessment, as Rebecca has said as well, the 5-year work program with the 2 years midterm review, it doesn't give us enough time to implement and to see progress. So our recommendation is to have a 10-year work program and potentially either a midterm review after 5 years or having a gap, which is 5 years. But overall, we are looking for the long-term mandate for the work program or 10 years timelines. And another important strategic shift, and this our demands as well. That's why Rebecca did presented what has not worked, because we formulated our demand based on our assessment of what has not worked and how can we make this the new work program better. So it's not just replicating the same work program. What we have noted in the previous work program is we do have most of the activities doesn't really have a target outcome, right? We have, for example, a very general language of increased participation, but we don't know that what is the target that we want to deliver by by when, or we are strengthening capacity of national gender focal points or women's rights organization, but what are the target that we are looking for, or we are mobilizing finance for gender action or engaging that finance can be accessible, but we don't have the actual target. So for us, we believe if we have to make the work program really speaks to the needs of communities and women, all their diversities, but also support the secretariat, we need to have at the very least the minimum or headlines target of what do we want to achieve by the end of the 10 years, so that we are able to assess the progress that we are making. The third strategic ask from the Women and Gender Constituency is the inclusive participation. It is important to note that unlike potentially many other agenda items, the work program on gender and gender climate action really and engagement of women and communities, it's really the work that has been done collectively. If you read the synthesis report from the Secretariat, you will see the number of the organizations who are non-party on how they have supported the implementation of the Gender Action Plan. So we want that to be appreciated and included, so that we know that the implementation of this work program is not just led by parties, but also with other actors, and their participation is appreciated. And this also includes appreciating that the participation of groups, marginalized community, in all our diversity, it doesn't only end with us doing the work, but also being in the table when decisions have been made. So that is an important aspect as well. And the fourth demands from the Women and Gender Constituency is the party level action. For the years that work program has been implemented, we do appreciate that a lot has been done. But one of the clear gap that we have seen that most of the actions, activities are centered at the secretariat level, while the communities, especially girls, women, people living in urban poor, are continue to carry the brand of climate action. We have seen in the previous gap, some of the government have taken their own initiative to develop, for example, their National Gender Action Plan, but that there is no mandate for that. But what we are asking here, not necessarily to have a mandate for parties to have their own National Gender Action Plan, but within the work program and the action plan to have a clear, specific action that parties need to lead, and that also make it easy to report. It has been hard, for example, for government and also other stakeholders, including civil society, to smoothly report on the progress that we have made, because the way it was crafted, it was very global heavy and with a very little action that had been done at party level. And also this has been a direct ask from most of our members that they want to engage, or most of the work that they're doing is at the country level, and they want to have hooks that can help them to engage with their government to support their work at country level, because that is where the actual demands and the actual need to addressing gender inequalities in the context of climate change are. And fifth is the coherence. And this is really to respond to what we have seen as the gap. Of course, in the current gap, we have coherence, but as Rebecca has said, most of this coherence has been framed in a very event-based and not a systematic approach to making sure that the work program become an anchor and doesn't silo, and the relationship between either gender work program with adaptation, with the finance, or with the mitigation work program is not just, like a reporting participation, or is not just co-hosting an event, but really embedding or GAP being in a position to reinforce that work and making sure that there will be a stronger gender mainstreaming. And this coherence is within the UNFCCC, but also building coherence with the other UN entities, for example, the CSW, in the event that there was decision that have been made. And we've seen, for example, CSW 66 has a very strong decision, agreed conclusion on a climate and gender. So being able to also tap what is existing within the UN mechanism as well when it comes to gender, because at the country level, most of these commitment and decision are implemented in the same way, or potentially in some instances, for example, they're implemented in the same ministries. For example, most of the gender action plan when it comes to Rio Convention, by and large, they're supported by the same ministry. So building that coherence will be critical as well. And last is finance. The robust work program and ambitious work program that Women in Gender is looking for is the one that will operationalize and will make sure that there is resources to implement the actual GAP itself. But also, so that is one part. And the second part, there will be a commitment on the mobilization of resources to support the gender transformative climate action everywhere. And that include, for example, on how we can ensure that there is enhanced access from the enhanced access for the funds to support gender-related action at country level, etc. So those are the 6 strategic demands from the WGC for this year gender work program and the gap. As I said, again, we have a detailed demand on texture-specific demands, which we are happy to share. But for now, this is how this is the demands look like in terms of, like, if you are asked, if you meet your negotiator, what can you ask for? These are some of the top line ask that you can put forward. So before knowing that we are almost 20 minutes, still have like a good time, possibly I can run through to how can you be engaged and how can you support this work, and then we can open up for question and answer, if that's okay for you, Claudia. All right. So if you can go to the next slide on how you can, yes. So how can we engage? You have heard the history, what happened at the SB and where we are now. And it seems important to also note that post from the SB to COP29, we know as Women and Gender Constituency, most of the parties are coordinating and engaging and consulting each other. So it's also important as you engage for you not to wait until you reach COP. If you have an opportunity to engage your delegation now, because this is the time that delegation are consolidating their positions, this is the time that parties are consulting with each other and building bridges, because we do not have time when we are in Baku. As of now, we do know the gender negotiation have been allocated 5 slots. So that is not too many, like literally for the 1 hour slot, that is like equal 5 hour slot. So most of work, we understand that has been happening now in terms of the consultation. So it's really important for you to engage your delegation now before you wait to COP. So how you can engage, we really, because today this is the cross constituency, we know most of you are not primarily, some of you are not primarily engaging with the women in gender. So whether you are working in the NGO constituency, or you are in the Hama constituency, or you are any grouping, it's really important for all of you to prioritize gender. If this decision will be passed, then we will be back 10 years to make other decisions. So this is really a big deal for women in gender. This is really a big deal for this year to have this decision, because if we get the 5 years work program, that means you can only come back to it 10 years later if we get the 10 years work program. So we are asking you to prioritize. We are also asking you, we know most of you will be engaging in bilateral with parties, either with your own delegation, but also with other delegations. So we are encouraging you to raise it and making it as a visible priority, that you are expecting a decision, and not just a decision, an ambitious decision. And in the event that you feel that your team will not be able to articulate the demands or articulate the ask, kindly ask the WGC. We are committed to make colleagues available to support your team in the bilaterals. And again, we also ask you to engage your delegation, and specifically, if you have an opportunity to engage your head of delegation, kindly do so. One of the challenge that we see, that most of the head of delegation usually sit with the presidents, outline the priorities, set the agenda. If the advocates only end with a national agenda focal point, then we are missing the political leadership we so need to advance this agenda. So we are also asking, in the event you have access to a head of delegation, raise it, and making them aware that it is important for them to come out of COP29 with ambitious and robust decision on the gender work program and its agenda action plan. What we committed as the WGC, as I said, we are committing to make our team available to support you throughout your advocacy, but also we will have the detailed demand accessible to all of you. So we have the strategic demand, which will be ready to be shared as soon as possible, but also we'll have the textual proposals. So kindly reach out to us. We have publicly already shared the submissions. What we did, we have a very detailed submission in 2022 to access the progress that has been made. And also that was in the lead up to the midterm review, but also we did other submission this year in assessing the performance of the gap overall during the 5 years. We are happy to make all of those are publicly available, but happy to share it with you. But also we have a gender tracker that we have tracked all the gender-related decisions and mandates across the board. So you can also use that. So that is the few ways that you can engage. We'll be keen and happy to hear from you as well. If you have a question, if you have any suggestion, kindly let us know. And with that, allow me now to open the Q&A session for anyone anyone who have questions, who have a point of clarification, anyone who have an addition, the floor now is open. I see Luciana and then followed by Fatma.
Bom dia a todos e todas. Vou iniciar a minha audiodescrição. Eu sou uma mulher afro-indígena, de cabelos cacheados, pretos e de olhos pretos, uso um brinco amarelo e estou usando uma camiseta de Animal Planet. Faço parte da Rede Vozes Negras pelo Clima, que é uma união de mulheres afrodescendentes e afro-indígenas de distintos biomas do Brasil, que fazem confluência, articulação e inovação, bem como estamos trabalhando em territórios no enfrentamento do racismo ambiental, combatendo as desigualdades sociais, econômicas e políticas, triste legado do colonialismo nas Américas Latinas. Como, por exemplo, nossa companheira Simone Lourenço, que luta contra a agenda do crescimento econômico das atividades dos combustíveis fósseis, que degrada os biomas da Caatinga, da Mata Atlântica, e também os assoreamentos, dos manguezais e as remoções forçadas de comunidades locais, como quilombolas. Deste bioma, também nós temos a Lídia, a Cris, Camila e Zezé. Da Amazônia, vem a Silvana, quebradeira do coco babaçu, que com a sua prática artesanal de extrativismo, saber ancestral, mantém os babaçuais vivos frente às intensas queimadas criminosas provocadas pelo agronegócios e monoculturas. Da Mata Atlântica, presente em quase todo o território brasileiro, vem Marisa, e a Mônica, Amanda, além de mim, essa mulher afro-indígena, vítima de um dos maiores crimes ambientais desse país, que está sendo agora julgado até em Londres, que foi o rompimento da barragem em Mariana, contaminando toda a área do Rio Doce. Bem, nós, dessas matas atlânticas, como eu disse, a Marisa e a elas são guardiãs de práticas agroecológicas, da pesca artesanal, da medicina natural, e, ao mesmo tempo, somos submetidas a intensos processos de violências, como a falta de saneamento básicos, inundações e deslizamentos de terra em períodos de eventos climáticos extensos. Nós, mulheres afrodescendências, negras, quilombolas, periféricas, afro-indígenas e faveladas, lutamos e nos posicionamos contra o sistema patriarcal, racista, colonialista e capitalocena que nos são impostos desde os nossos nascimentos, independente do nosso continente, Defendemos e almejamos por uma agenda de adaptação antirracista e de políticas públicas da ação climática que reconheçam as necessidades específicas dessas comunidades. Por isso, precisamos garantir que mulheres afrodescendentes façam parte dos acordos celebrados durante e pós a COP29. São também as mulheres que foram radicalizadas, racializadas pelo colonialismo, que sofrem os impactos das mudanças climáticas, mas não são viabilizadas, não são vistas, porque a abordagem de gênero ainda é feita pela óptica da branquitude, infelizmente. Aqui no Brasil, e não é diferente das Américas, somos a maioria na produção familiar, mas, paradoxalmente a isso, estamos no topo do mapa da fome, na falta de acesso de políticas de saúde, e este cenário coloca-nos em um quadro de extrema vulnerabilidade social, de dependência financeira, e em outros contextos somos vítimas de um círculo vicioso e de difícil ruptura, que é o vício, que é o círculo da violência doméstica, da violência policial, da violência sexual, que se agrava com a crise climática e se intensifica na crise dos direitos humanos. Portanto, para a COP29, nós, da Vozes Negras pelo Clima, esperamos que a conclusão da revisão do Programa de Trabalho de Lima e seu GAP apontem para uma abordagem de gêneros de forma interseccional, entendendo que as sobreposições de raça, de etnia, gênero, classe, território, aponta para as experiências distintas de violação de direito. Esperamos que se defina um novo programa ao longo prazo, mas estruturados por meio de implementações e com as incorporações do reconhecimento das mulheres afrodescendentes, que faz parte de uma população de mais de 200 milhões de pessoas no mundo, como um dos grupos mais afetados pela crise climática. É preciso enfrentar a necessidade de promover uma reforma na arquitetura global do entendimento do que se é gênero. Urge iniciar a reparação das desigualdades históricas e estrutural, cujos corpos femininos e da LGBTQIA+, são vitimados por séculos na tentativa machista e misógina patriarcal de nos inferiorizar. Chega, basta. A justiça climática precisa contemplar a justiça de gênero na ótica interseccional da afrodescendência e do ecofeminismo. Muito obrigada.
Thank you so much, Luciana, and thank you for giving us a very practical example and realities of why we are calling for intersectionality, because that is in essence what we have it at the center of our demand for this year. We have been consistently saying that our realities are not the same. We have all of us live with the multiple identities, but in so many ways our multiple identities determine whether I will survive the flood, whether I will have access to adaptive technologies and tools, whether I will be able to sit in a decision-making table. So indeed, what you said is why we are asking for intersectionality to be able to really unpack the impact of the gender in climate change when it comes to race, when it comes to age, when it comes to location, when it comes to social status, when it comes to religion, when it comes to disability, and being able to give mandate, for example, of the Secretariat to correlate those information or research to be done, so that we are not only saying, for example, women are impacted by climate change, but my ability to be impacted as an able, educated women who have a privilege, for example, to speak a good English is quite different to the level of impact of colleagues who are not able to potentially work. And we have seen cases and cases how have manifested. And that's why we want to have a decision that's really center intersectionality. And thank you for giving us that practical example as well of why this is important. Before I go to Fatma, it's also important to note that this session is part of the series of the session that WGC is offering. We started last week with understanding the context of the region that the COP29 will be held in Eastern Europe. Today we are doing gender, and there will be other session on technology and gender and finance and gender on mitigation and gender. And WGC will compile a detailed advocacy tool which will outline what is the issue, what is the agenda item, what happened in the ASB, what have been WG submission, and what is also demands. This is important to note because we cannot have, our engagement is not only on the gap into the work program. So that is one battlefield, but also we work to ensure that the finance decision that will be gender responsive and transformative, so as adaptation, so as just a transition, etc. So it's also to understand that the spectrum of our engagement. I'll call Fatma, and then I believe, Zuki, you have been monitoring the chat. So also I'll call you soon after Fatma to see if there's any question that comes from the chat that we need to amplify as well. And then after Fatma, I'll also ask the panelists to respond to any of those questions. After Fatma and Zuki, I'll ask my panelists to respond to the question. Fatma?
Yes, salam everyone, hi. Thank you so much for the presentations and for informative session. It's very good information. I have just a comment or attention to the issue of participation. It's been, and someone talk about that in one of the presenter. And there is an issue of accreditation, especially for this COP. It's actually, and if not million, hundreds of thousands of women being excluded from getting accreditation. And this is actually, this is an issue is been going on for a long time, and I don't see any concentration in dealing with this or highlighting this issue or advocating for many grassroots women and many grassroots NGOs at the ground who never been able to be accredited to participate at any of those COPs. But for this year is also is really unbelievable. It's very limited. I know many, even from my colleagues at the ground, who get some funds can participate, but it's impossible to get accreditation. So this, I just want, yani, or request that if WGC concentrate on the issue of accreditation, especially for grassroots and for women from the South, I mean, generally, and it has to be some kind of justice in terms of accreditation to UNFCCC. It can't be just for big organization and big networks, and most of them majority from North, and those who are really now dealing with sequences of climate change effects on the ground, dealing with all the issues, cannot be even be able to raise their voice or to be part of these negotiations, or to be part of these COPs and all these discussions. So I really want this issue to be addressed more, and to find solution. UNFCCC has to change the policy, and they have to engage and include women organization from the South, from grassroots, and to be accredited, not to just every year to beg those or big organizations to get badges or to get accreditation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fatma, for that. And I think I potentially can respond that in my capacity of the WGC focal point. So yes, I think what you said is quite critical in terms of the accreditation, and we really encourage all our Global South organization to apply for accreditation. It's a long process, and I believe it takes a year to apply, but nevertheless, it's really, really important to apply for you to be accredited. And if there's any information that you might need to guide you through on how that application process works, I think members of the WGC will be happy to support you through that. It is important to get accreditation because, as you have noted, as you have said, in many years, most of the accredited organizations were from the Global North. And because of that, this year, the Secretariat, after advocacy, sustained advocacy from WGC with other partners as well, in terms of the lack of representation of the colleagues from the Global South, and this is not directly to the WGC, but to all observers, there was noted that there is over-representation of the colleagues from the Global North in the UNFCCC, and there is lack of representation from the colleagues from the Global South in the UNFCCC. So this year specifically, the UNFCCC launched a reform, and they gave more accreditation to the organization from the Global South, as opposed to the organization from the Global North. So what has happened to us, I think, specifically is most of our partners from the Global South are not registered. So we are not accredited. So we are unable to benefit from that much needed transformation. And because most of our partners were getting badges from the colleagues from the Global North, so now the colleagues at Global North are receiving less badges because badges were supposed to go to the colleagues from the Global South. Unfortunately, most of the colleagues from Global South were not accredited entities. So there is a lot of lesson that we are learning throughout the process. We will come out after the COP29, come January, we will be working on how do we engage. So for example, if even some of those accredited organizations were not able to request for badges, and because of that, then we also miss those opportunities. But for the meantime, for those who are a member of the WGC or member of our network, you can check with my colleague, Suki. We are still collecting requests for badge. Over the years, what we have done is we pair our colleagues. So for the organization that have access to badge and they do know that they won't be engaging in the COP29 or they won't be engaging in the capacity that they will that they have access to. We are asking them to donate those badges to the WGC, and for the organization that need badges, that we are able to pair those who have badges and those who need badges. I believe we are closing that process potentially tomorrow. My colleague Suku will speak about, will share that detail. So please do that as we sustain our advocacy to make sure there is equitable representation in the UNFCCC processes. And we need all of you to be part of that, because one good strategy, for example, this year's strategy of shifting to the global north has not worked out for us because we missed an important point of making sure that we have Global South Organization accredited, and hence we are unable to reap the benefit of it. Suzuki, if you have questions that have been asked, and then if you can say a word on that.
Yeah. So thank you, colleagues. I think these questions that sort of we haven't managed to address can be incorporated in your closing remarks quite nicely. But there was a question around, where does the WGC, essentially the question is around where else do we engage in the multilateral process? This question was related specifically to the SDGs, for example, but I'm sure we can speak even more just generally about the connections we try to make. There was also a pertinent question around what are the risks to progress in the likely scenario that the gap is pushed to COP30, right? So what are the risks in terms of that scenario? And then, of course, there was a question, we did share our demands, but our colleagues are asking, is there, 2 to 3 really core, if they had to leave here saying like, how can they actually push this in their different, spaces and areas of work? What are some of those recommendations in terms of how we amplify this work, especially given the year? And yeah, so it's a question around multilateral spaces, the question around the risk with having it pushed, and of course, some top line, where do we punch really hard as we look to this COP and mobilizing solidarity across the world? And I think Claudia has done a brilliant job really nailing those the rest of the questions in the chat box. So over to you, colleagues, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Suki, for that. So I'll start with Rebecca, and then I'll go to Diego, and then I'll finish with Cloud. And as you respond to the question of your choice, also, if you'll give your parting shot of like, what is like one thing that you would want people to take out of this session and to engage their government on?
Yeah. Let me go for the question that's about, okay, if I have one sentence or one pitch that I can do, what should I go for? And I really think that, the submission by the WGC is a very strong document to sort of make yourself familiar with the type of language and what we're trying to push for. And then you can always nail it down to just 3 bullet points. So if you want to make it super easy, we want intersectionality, coherence, and finance, right? If you want it super condensed, I think that should work. And also, I think what will help you in your advocacy is that, yes, this is the year of finance. We've heard that a lot, but it is also the year of gender. And it is quite the important year to push for this. So don't let gender get sidetracked in these discussions, and ensure that you also bring it to the different spaces or the different negotiations that you will be following, because it's crucial that you're there as well. So it was shared before, right? We don't only focus on the Lima Work Program on Gender and the Gender Action Plan. We are hoping to ensure that gender is embedded more firmly in the other negotiation streams as well. So we need you everywhere. And as a sort of last encouragement, get involved. Make sure that you know some of our faces now. Write us, get in touch, learn from each other. I've learned a bunch from the people also in this call as well. And it might be scary at first, and it might seem like it's very high over, but it touches on really real and substantial things that we need all of your energy for. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Diego?
Thank you so much, Michi, Rebecca, Claudia. I think my two ideas. The first one is that I am more optimistic in a sense that I think that the current draft of the Lima Work Program has a very good basis to start building a truly intersectional, cohesive, and strong enough finance-wise Lima Work Program. what we need to do is to not go down below that, right? We need to really protect that text and encourage parties to build on it rather than take out from it. So I'm hopeful. And then to the question about what other spaces should we be showing up? I mean, obviously, across the UNFCCC, there are many areas: adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage, where we need to enhance gender. But from my organization's perspective, we've also find a lot of opportunities within the human rights negotiations that predominantly take place in Geneva, across the Human Rights Council, working with the special rapporteurs and the independent experts has usually proven to be a very good strategy. Also remind people that the Summit of the Future just passed here in New York. We now have the Pact of the Future, which has 60 something actions that need to be implemented, the Global Digital Compact, the Pact for Future Generations. So there is a lot coming in the pipeline in multilateral wise, and we need to ensure that gender is, it's truly a cross-cutting issue. CSW coming up, Beijing Plus 30 is going to take place in New York in March of next year. So there's a lot coming. The last negotiations of plastic, all of this, again, gender is a transversal issue and needs to be fairly and equitably be represented. And then just to mention some few, but there's a lot of work to be done out there beyond the UNFCCC, and the WGC is very conscious of that and has a great platform and a lot of really good lessons learned to engage in these other processes. I would close with that.
Thank you so much, Diego. I understand, Claudia, you are in Cali for the CBD. If you can also talk a little bit about that. And I think a few weeks ago as well, we did host a course, Women Caucuses of all the Rio Convention webinar as well, in the spirit of making sure that our asks are really aligned. So, you are tech, and if you can also speak a little bit about the integration.
Thank you so much, Mishi. And yeah, here at Cali, so I think like in general, we want to see across all of the Rio conventions that like fortification of just like recognition of how all of the conventions are tied together and how they're all exacerbated by like the same things, and like one is like they're just so interconnected, and gender in that sense is a pillar of like what we want to see within all three Rio conventions. So like strengthening of language, but also like that coherence piece is something that we really want to see. Like the CBD gender action plan of action can feed and like be an example for the UNFCCC gender action plan, and the things that we see within one can be fortified by the other. And if we like can really like help each other in our advocacy in that way, and like understand how these issues are interconnected and how these issues like really feed off each other, then we can make like a stronger advocacy collectively. And I saw like several questions in the chat that I'd be like very like at least some of them, for example, concerning the negotiation agendas. Tomorrow there's a info session hosted by the Gender Secretariat, which will provide more information. And I put the link in the chat as well with so like if anybody wants to register to like really know what the Secretariat, like more of the technical components on behalf of the Secretariat. Oh, I think my camera froze.
It did, but we could still hear you.
Yeah, we hear you well, Claudia. But yeah, we lost your camera.
I think Mishi also froze a bit there, but those were certainly some lovely closing remarks. And just to echo what Claudia was saying about another information session on gender, to those who are still interested in learning more, the link is in the chat, but my colleague Mishi is back. And indeed, Claudia, we heard your entire intervention. So over to you, Mishi, for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zuki, and sorry, Claudia and I, and it's internet and it's not as stable. So we are in Cali engaging with the CBD, and in that spirit of like really working together to advance gender equality in all the Rio Convention. Just one thing I would say before closing remark in terms of the state of negotiation. So we do know now we have 5 slots for the first week. Usually gender is negotiated in the first week, but we have engaged the COP presidency to make them aware that chances are we might need more, parties might need more slots to negotiate. So I think attend COP with a preparation, like at least mental preparation that will negotiation will go to the second week, and then when they'll do that, that will be now in the leadership of the COP presidency. So we do hope, we hope that everything will be concluded in the first week, but in the event that won't happen, they might be moved to the second week. So far, the COP agreed slots are the 5, but the COP presidency has assured us that they will make space available when parties need to have, especially if they will want to move to have the work program and the agenda action plan agreed. There will be need definitely more time than 5 slots. So that is the state of negotiation. I think just one important information to share as well, that WGC every year will be doing color campaign. So this year we will be wearing purple to advance gender equality in the negotiation. So this is just URY for your information to start packing or finding your purple will tell you exactly when you need to wear it, but making sure that you have it in your pack to COP attires for this year. We will share more details on how we will use the COP space to make sure that we create awareness, we amplify, we engage, and we make everyone know that this is important here for gender. And us as a gender advocates, we are in that COP to make sure that that has been delivered. With regards to, I think there was a question, the last question was on the 10-year time frame. We do believe that the most practical way, and we believe that still align, if we would have the better timelines, for example, if it will move to, I think there was also a question that what if that it moves to COP30? We still think that we have for the gender action plan to move to COP30, it won't make a massive difference in terms of the action, and that will allow us more time, especially party, to really design activities and priorities that are fit for purpose, that are ambitious and respond to the needs of their needs as government, but also needs of the community that they serve. So I think those are all the questions will keep us engaging you. Please be in touch with the WGC. We'll be on the ground. We'll be hosting morning caucuses every day at COP, but also we have a very robust, ambitious, and very resilient working group on gender that will be following gender in every sort of like back to back. Yeah, we have the team that will be in the room, will be outside strategizing, following up. We're happy to share the text proposal that when you need them, and we are happy to engage. For those who are keen on finance, kindly be reminded that we'll have a finance, I believe. I don't know if my colleague Suki will be able to pull the slides or a graphic with all our upcoming session as well. And specifically, there was a question I was about to forget on the finance. We are actively engaging our finance colleagues to make sure that there is a robust, transformative language on NCQG specifically, but also we are not just looking at the NCQG, we are looking at the NCQG as one entry point, and we have seen the text is out yet. There is a reference on gender, not as a strong one, but at least there is there is a sort of like an entry point, but also they're engaging to make sure there is a very strong guidance that coming from Standing Committee of the guidance to support the implementation of the action plan. As we say, the question of the means of implementation has been crucial, and we do believe that will be the deciding factor for the adoption of the work program. So we are really looking forward to support in terms of the proposals of how we can make sure that there is resources and finance available to support implementation of the actual gap itself, but also making resources available for any gender gender-related climate action. So with that, thank you so much for the 6 minutes you have given us ahead of the agreed time. Thank you, our interpreters, for being with us. Thank you so much for my colleague, Claudia, who has pushed and organized this session single-handedly, for comrades, Diego and Rebecca, for sharing your inputs, and also for the entire gender working group. I have seen Eleanor, who has here, like, few of us are in the screen, but that has been the work that has been co-created by a number of the thematic gender working group members. So thank you so much. And I don't know, Zuki, if you're ready to share what the timelines for the other session, for those who will be interested to engage in the other session. And with that, back to you, Zuki, for sharing if it's available. Otherwise,
you.
we can.
No, I've shared the link tree. We have a lot of banging sessions. They back to back next week. The link tree has listed all of them. So if you just click on that link tree, you will see all the incredible capacity sessions offers we are having, especially the UNFCCC 101 session, which delves deeper into what our colleagues were sharing, especially regarding the holistic approach to gender and mainstreaming that we're pushing for as a constituency. So please, I'll reshare the link tree one more time. If you click on that, all the things pop up really nice and easy. Thank you so much for joining and staying over time, and join the WGC Advocacy Network. If you don't already, you can find that information on our website. Thank you all, interpreters, everyone, Claudia, your leadership, and the entire gender working group. This has been a pleasure. And of course, the COP29 leadership who made all of this possible and do continue to engage in the remaining sessions. And much love to you, COP29 Coalition team. This was an excellent collaboration. Many thanks, Mishi.
Thank you so much. Goodbye, everyone. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you, Suki. Ciao.
Thank you. Ciao.